Our guest today is serving her second term as Congresswoman from Illinois' 8th Congressional District. Her district includes portions of Lake, McHenry, and Cook counties. Our guest today was born in Chicago and graduated from Maine East High School and Roosevelt University. There we go, Roosevelt. Thank you. Yeah. She's got a lot of constituents. Why don't your constituents stand up? Everyone who's a constituent, please stand up. Congresswoman Luckenoval, give her a round of applause. She spent 20 years in the business world before being elected to Congress. She and her husband, Alan, have been married for 24 years and have 2 beautiful daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, Congresswoman Melissa Bean. Congresswoman.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon. I know many of you woke up and heard the radio talking about bailing out, and you were worried about your basements and the rain, and then you read the Wall Street Journal, and you found out what they were really talking about. Certainly we're hearing that term, for those of us who serve on the Financial Services Committee in Washington, far too much lately. And as you've read, the feds have decided enough is enough in the bailout department, and so we're going to see how the chips fall as we move forward. And we've been I want to first thank Jay and Paul and Kathy and Tom, who put these lunches together, for inviting me to join you here today. I know we've been trying to get together since April, and we never were able to work it out till now, but I'm glad to be here. Originally, I was asked to talk about what have we been working on in Washington and where are we headed. And there's a number of great things to talk about, the things you don't read in the paper every day, about the College Cost Reduction Act that puts a little bit of takes some of the pain out of paying for college by reducing interest rates, the largest increase in veterans' health care in the 77-year VA history, the 9/11 Commission recommendations finally being passed into law to protect our national security. There's a number of really positive things on a bipartisan basis that get done every day, and I could actually give you a litany much longer. But given today's headlines in these extraordinary times, I thought I'd adjust my comments, and at the end we'll have some questions. So if there are questions about some specific piece of legislation you're interested in, I'd be happy to answer that. But I think looking at the headlines and the economic instability, I know, like many of you, I'm sort of humbled by the challenges that our nation is facing. And as we see not only the GSE takeover, but the continuing collapse of major financial institutions, it begs a number of questions. How many more? How did we get here? What are we going to do now? How long will it last? But while those may seem like new questions, they've actually been hanging around for a while in the minds of Americans. I remember when I was first elected, it was one of my top concerns was the economic insecurities facing many families. Because what we're now reading about how incomes have been flat or actually declined for most Americans since the year 2000. We're starting to feel it now, but it's been around for a long time. So long as the housing market continued to increase and interest rates were low, we were able to mask some of those underlying fundamental weaknesses in the system. And so families were borrowing from the equity in their home, and the prices just kept going up, and really leveraging themselves. But as you all know, you can't do that forever. Eventually, the equity runs out. And I think the sad reality is that weakened financial condition isn't just true for our families, but also for our nation, as we've leveraged our future as well by borrowing from China and many other foreign nations to cover the profligacy in Washington for services that our kids and grandkids aren't going to see, but they are going to have to pay for it. This is also unprecedented that at a time of war, we wouldn't ask Americans to pay for it with war bounds or tax increases, but instead have continued to do tax cuts at a time of war, not saying that it's important enough to be there, it should also be important enough to pay for. And this has had a toll on our national economy. We've added over $4 trillion in the last 8 years to our national debt, which is now over $9 trillion. And that's pretty staggering. And I think we bought into the concept that leverage was such a good thing that it was unlimited. And we bought into, I think the president bought into Dick Cheney's perspective that deficits don't matter. But after $4 trillion, I think we have to really start questioning that, because at some point it's unsustainable. And that's what happened with the housing market, is the irrational exuberance that had been in the stock market. People wanted to move their capital somewhere else, put it in real estate. And so we've seen that irrational exuberance there hit its top, and now it's been coming down, and we don't know how much further it will go. I mean, there's some positive signs for the new home inventory. We've gone through about 2/3 of that inventory, but foreclosures continue to increase and put existing homes back into that inventory of houses, so we're not yet getting down to that bottom. And that was also done in a spirit of leverage mattering. The no doc, no down, drive-by appraisal, easy credit environment, where we had not all, but some financial institutions and loan originators take it too far and put people into homes that they really couldn't pay for, and not sticking with the underwriting practices of the past, where you should have a little skin in the game so that you don't walk away when prices go down, which is one of the reasons in the recent legislation that we passed, we basically are allowing people to rewrite their loans at present value, because they're walking away. These are people who are employed and have the ability to pay, but because they're upside down, they owe more on the home than the value of the home, too many are walking away, and even financial institutions who want to allow them to rework the loan can't do it without getting an entirely new loan, which is what we did in the recent foreclosure avoidance bill. The challenge we're facing as we move forward is that there's no more pockets to pull from. The equity's gone. And so where do we go from here? I mean, the subprime challenge that we had has essentially created a credit crunch that is more universal, and it's affected our entire capital markets structure. Now, I've talked to many of you in the past. You know, I have a business background of over 20 years. And so as a fiscal conservative, I've been talking about these issues for a long time. I've also talked about competitiveness and the need for us to retain our can-do American spirit that says we can compete and we can win in the global stage. I've talked about the importance of small businesses and how they are the job creators in this economy and have been for quite some time, and represent about 80% of the new jobs created in this country, and how we need to not overburden them, but create an environment that allows them to grow. And I'm still very committed to a competitiveness agenda, as I know many in Congress are, and we're going to have to get back to some basics, meaning we have to invest in education, energy, and transportation infrastructure to be able to compete. And we've had advantages on all three fronts. Many are worried about emerging nations, and they're starting to compete with us, but they're starting from so woefully behind us, not all of them in the education space, because they've been gaining on us there for quite some time. But relative to energy infrastructure and transportation infrastructure, we've had a long time advantage. But as we've seen since the recent bridge failure in Minnesota, we haven't kept up and maintained those advantages, and we're going to need to continue to do that. But as we look at the headlines today, it's a bigger and broader problem than that. We have to restore confidence, competitiveness, and consumer spending, and get back to some basic principles that have made this nation strong. Recently, I was asked the following question: what should America's economic, political, and military role in the world be? And I'm going to read you an answer that I put together in response to that question. I think America should seek to retain our economic, political, and military preeminence. But the U.S. will not remain the beacon of peace and prosperity that has been respected by nations around the world if the unique personal freedoms and economic opportunities embodied in the American dream become unattainable here at home. I don't think Americans should be threatened by the growth of middle-class economies developing in emerging nations as those new consumers expand available markets and shared interests with our existing and potential allies. We can and should seek to compete in the global marketplace, but with a keen interest in preserving the thriving American middle class and consumer spending engine that propelled and has sustained our economy's vitality. We shouldn't seek to force democratic or economic principles upon other nations, but promote by example an unwavering commitment to individual liberty and the constitutional protections, including freedom of religion, that have fostered our free and peaceful society. And we should maintain the supremacy of our military as we seek to restore her role and image as protector of America's people and ideals and an able friend to our allies. I answer that question in the context of this economic discussion because it speaks to that middle-class spending engine. And if we don't get back to basics here, we no longer become that shining example, that beacon on the hill that other nations aspire to wanting to follow. Respect is something that has to be earned. But if we don't take care of business here, we're going to be in for some serious trouble. As a fiscal conservative, the fiscal irresponsibility has been unacceptable. Deficits do matter. We shouldn't be leveraging our future. And I bring that up today in the context of presidential elections coming up in just a few weeks. I think it is important that we're more fiscally responsible, but we as Americans are going to have to be electorally responsible. Are we going to select leaders who will continue with fiscal irresponsibility, who will follow along the same status quo, who believe that deficits don't matter, and that in fact the economic challenges that families are facing are psychological? Do we believe we have a leader, we would have a leader who, when asked about the economy, said, I'm really not up on the economy, but I'm reading Greenspan's book. Is that the kind of responsible, deliberative, and thoughtful approach to the economic challenges we're facing as we move forward? I think we have to take ownership for the outcomes of not only what we do in our businesses to help in this economy, but what we do with our votes and as we participate and move forward. And so we have to remain truly engaged, both as officials, elected officials, and also as an electorate. And I think when we see the headlines change to more substantive policy discussions, I think we'll have a more informed electorate to do that. Right now, what we see is a story about markets crashing, and then we see, with similar size headlines, how many of Sarah Palin's shoes are selling. And to me, that's a disconnect. I think we have to move beyond the fascination with someone who's a very compelling figure. But Karen and Rita and I, as elected officials, we're not so shocked as the media seems to be, and I don't think most of the American public is, that women can have babies and still work and have a career. She's balancing. Of course she's balancing. That's what you do. That's what we all do as working parents. That shouldn't be such a shocker. And so before we saddle future generations with the debts of our own nations and our own generation's profligacy, I hope we all think first. And on that note, I think we open it up for a little bit of Q&A. All right. Do I stand right next to you?
Yes, you may.
Okay, that's how we'll do it.
Just don't call me Nancy. Nancy Pelosi, just a little.
I don't think I would have confused
Hey, Ed,
you.
can you give me a little consecutive translation? Ed Mazer can understand me. Well, we start off with Dan Miller, as always, because Dan Miller has had the great honor many years ago of editing Paul Green, which very, very tough task. We know that. I bet. From Dan Miller. The federal ban on offshore drilling is scheduled to expire October 31st. Should the ban be allowed to expire?
Well, I think I'll be Nancy for a second. From what I've heard from the speaker is it's likely to expire if we don't move forward on a long-term comprehensive energy bill, which is what we'll be working on. In fact, when I leave here, I'm heading straight to the airport. We'll have votes tonight, not on that, but I believe tomorrow or Wednesday we'll be looking at the energy legislation that has come together. On that note, I think it's a very good question, and I'll take a moment to just talk about it. I think, again, it's interesting how for a long time we've been talking about renewable energy and how important it is to wean ourselves from our dependence on foreign oil. But it's taken those who have subscribed to an oil-only strategy and say, drill, baby, drill, let's drill more, to actually maybe have a real conversation that will allow us to do that. And while I certainly support additional drilling in that context, I do want to just bust the myth that any short-term drilling today is going to have any effect on prices at the pump. Conversely, it's actually been the higher prices, as painful as they are, that has caused behavioral changes amongst consumers that has actually taken a little bit of that pain, still not where we'd like it at, because people are using public transportation, they're using more fuel-efficient vehicles. And what we really need to do is have a long-term, comprehensive strategy, because an oil-only strategy never has been. You know, how many presidents have said we're going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil and then stayed the course on an oil-only strategy? It's going to be that comprehensive solution that'll get us there.
From Joyce Saxon, City Club board member. Thought we'd give you a real specific question, Melissa. Is there any conceivable way to stem the tide of jobs going overseas?
Okay.
You have 3 sentences to answer that.
Okay. I like when they do the debates and they say, you know, how are you going to solve Middle East peace? And you have 30 seconds, you know, same thing. Well, I think economically, on issues of competitiveness that I mentioned, I think if we do invest in infrastructure, it's critical to our competitiveness, but it also, those are job creators. Some of you, I'm sure, have read Thomas Friedman's new book. He's getting a lot of talk. It's a very interesting book. I like it better than The World is Flat, which was also a good book, but it was kind of restated the same thing. This is much broader. And as he talks about moving from the IT jobs to ET, energy technology jobs, I think he's right on target. So we can work towards reducing our dependence on foreign oil while creating jobs with wind, with solar, geothermal, so many emerging technologies. Many of you may not know, Cranes wrote about it recently. Right here, Chicago is the #2 city in wind power development. And there are tremendous jobs resulting from that right here as well. And so we have to, as part of whether it be the comprehensive energy bill that we're going to be working on this week or a separate standalone bill, we have to continue the production tax credits in that regard. So those new innovators will be able to continue in what they're doing. Again, coming from a business background, I used to do, first I was in high tech in corporate America, then I did consulting, and I worked with businesses on looking at their longer term strategies. And one of the things we talked about, we used to look at Michael Porter's grid, where you talk about, you know, the market life cycle, and you have, you know, new introduction, and then growth, maturity, and decline. Well, any company that wants to sustain its growth over the long term is always looking at what are the new emerging markets that they're going to participate in. They spend a consistent percentage of money on research and development so that as certain products are in maturity and about to decline, they know what's going to be coming to fill those revenues gaps. But as a country, we need to be thinking the same way and make sure that we, as the innovators of the world, retain that position and stay at the forefront in those emerging markets. And I wouldn't limit it to energy. I'd also, you know, include biotech, healthcare. There are other emerging markets as well.
Notice those full answers from her long career at Roosevelt University. A lot of essay tests. This is a shocker. There's a political question. From board member Ed Mazer. If you were advising Barack Obama, what would you tell him to get his campaign back on track, and how can he shed, hey, we got to get the writing a little bigger, how can he shed his tag of elitist? Now, go ahead.
Well,
you can pass on that one if you like.
No, I have no problem with it. I mean, hey, it's the political season. These questions are going to come up, and everybody knows I've been an official Obama mama for a long time. And I have been. All right, and there's a few others here. All right. And, you know, one of the reasons that I'm so impressed with his management style, again, going back to the business world, we've always worked with those top-down managers, my way or the highway. Well, we've seen how that's worked both in business and in politics. What Barack brings to the table is more of a bottom-up approach, staying connected, really listening to the ideas that are out there and being deliberative and discerning in deciding where he wants to continue to promote the policies that he thinks fits the challenges and the opportunities that we're facing. I don't think his campaign is off track. I think it's been pretty solid. I think there's no question that Sarah Palin has captivated the media with a very compelling story. But I think at the end of the day, these are extraordinarily challenging times, but they are rife with opportunity. And people are going to have to make decisions about who is going to put us on the track to move forward. As far as the elitist tag, I don't know who's buying into that concept. Maybe that gets traction somewhere. But a guy who's worked his way up, who never had anything handed to him, for John McCain to throw that, is pretty incredulous, frankly. And I think Michelle Obama answered that well. When she was on one of the talk shows and asked about the silver spoon. She said, well, we only had one spoon, so it was a little bit different. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you've been coasting pretty good telling on other political stories, but now we have one for you. Of course, this is unsigned, but I have a good hunch where it comes from. Very good writing, by the way. For those of you who don't know this issue, Melissa will explain it. How do you respond to criticism that blocking the CN proposal will send a signal to all railroads that investments to expand Chicago's rail infrastructure will be greeted with hostility by local governments and be concerned more about train traffic? This is a huge issue for some of you who are sitting out there. Mayor of Barrington, you better read that one again. See, this is what she wants to read again.
I wanted to know what the criticism was.
You guys, you're off the hook. I know, I checked. This is a huge issue for many places, but especially in the northwest suburbs, including some that are trying very hard to form Lincoln County. Scarlett O'Mullins. Go right ahead. Old joke.
Well, I actually met with some folks in the transportation industry earlier this morning, and, I think if you talk to those of us who are in opposition, we're not opposed to expanding rail infrastructure. But in fact, this deal that is proposed does not expand rail infrastructure, and in fact, it essentially proposes the untruths that says that we're going to take a problem in one congested, densely populated area, and we're going to move it to another, and proposing that as somehow fixing a problem or adding capacity. It's not doing that. If we were to look at an outer band, if we were going to invest in fast rail or additional rail infrastructure, which all of us recognize there's going to be a need to do, particularly given with the higher costs of fuel, looking at alternatives, that's an actual capacity increase. This deal just takes one problem from some communities and moves it to another, but in a rather egregious way by saying to those communities who will be only burdened by it, and guess what, you get to pay for it too, which is very un-American. And so that's where the challenges are. It's not to recognizing that we do need to create efficiencies. This deal just doesn't do it.
No. Your speech. Sorry. Normally we don't do this, but since Diana Nelson is a friend and has certain criteria, you are allowed to ask a daily double. That's D-A-I-L-Y. Question number one: should the new U.S. president veto all earmarks? And Diana's question number two: notwithstanding the issues, how would you compare the styles of Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin? This is known as sandbagging. Go right ahead. Pick either one or both.
All right. The first one was, should all earmarks be vetoed? Sadly, this is some of the political theater that goes on in Washington. Earmarks are funding requests, and they're projects that our local mayors and municipal folks that we work with and Cook County board members know that we need relative to some of the infrastructure we were talking about to maintain our competitiveness. There are some things that municipalities can't do on their own, and the federal government can and should play a role in. So I have never said earmarks are a bad thing. What we need, though, is transparency, and it's one of the reasons I've supported already reforms to create transparency. In fact, the new majority, the Democratic Congress, changed the rules, and so now you can't put earmarks in the dark of the night. You have to put your name next to them and let your project stand on the merit, and that's how it should be. But I've also co-sponsored legislation that would further earmark reform by bringing in a third-party group, a bipartisan group, to establish further rules so that you can decide how to prioritize the projects that are there. The reality is, with the exception of the Bridge to Nowhere types of examples that give earmarks a bad name and should, the majority of the projects that are proposed are very worthy projects, and they do stand on the merits. The challenge is, with $9 trillion of national debt and a growing deficit even this year and year over year, we can't afford to do all of them. So how should we prioritize them? And that's the next level of reform that I think we need to do, to consider. Obviously, small states want to see it equally divided amongst all the states. Those that are more populous say, well, that's not really relative to population and where the needs are. Those are things that should be determined by a third-party group that we can then apply in a consistent manner. Other things that would be looked at by this commission would include, should for-profit entities be able to benefit from a particular earmark? Those are some of the things that need to be worked out. But no, I don't think you should veto all earmarks, because there would be a lot of fallout across this nation for projects that have been supported in the past and that many of our communities count on. Oh, and as far as comparing the two, I'll let people choose to compare if they choose to do that. What I would say, and I briefly said it already, is to see a working mom and a story that a Sarah Palin has is a compelling story. And I know, just as some of my daughter's friends and the girls I talk to, and I know the girls you guys talk to in the schools, like to see women participating in government, and we should. I think it's a great step forward to see Sarah Palin, participating in the way she is as governor. Relative to whether she's ready for the presidency is something that many are going to have to decide, and whether her policies actually move us forward or actually take us backwards and regress.
To close, I just got the word from one of your people. You have to go back to...
Got to go vote yet today.
You got to go vote, and got to keep your ear to the grindstone. This is... little humor there, just sorry. This is from... I can't pronounce the first name. Last name is Riley. What's your first name? Good. All right. The recent mergers of large banks and equity firms seems to raise more risk as was the case in the 1930s. How can we maintain the separation of equity and banks? To close, the last question. You got it.
All right.
Boy, that gave her an easy one, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, there's been a real convergence as we look at capital markets reform, and there's been multiple blueprints for it. You've seen the Treasury report from Secretary Paulson. U.S. Chamber has their own capital markets reform recommended. There's the Bloomer-Schoenberg report. There's a number of things that talk about where regulatory overlap has existed. So there's also been, where those used to be kept more separate, a bleeding together of the capital and the businesses that they serve. I don't know what will be the course that we take to move forward, but I know that for the next president, given what's going on in our economy, the headlines we've talked about today, that we're going to have to look at various reforms to find the path that's going to best move us forward. Thank you all so much.
Round of applause. A one-year membership in the City Club, Melissa.
All right.
A City Club mug. We'll have a Paul Green Roosevelt mug for you next time. But there it is, and that is not an earmark, trust me. A round of applause. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.